Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to share a chilling story that will make you rethink everything you know about life and death. We're going to meet Ezekiel Thorne, a paramedic who, after years of saving lives, literally faced death and returned with a shocking truth about what life on Earth truly is. What he discovered on the other side will leave you speechless. So, before we dive into this journey, be sure to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any content like this. Now, get ready for an intense and surprising story about the true nature of our existence. My name is Ezekiel Thorne, but everyone calls me Zeke. I'm 47 years old, and I've been a paramedic in Denver for over 15 years. My life has been a constant dance between life and death, a delicate balance I've learned to navigate over the years. It's not an easy job, but it's rewarding in a way that few people understand. I'm the father of an incredible teenage daughter named Maya, who recently turned 16. She is my light, my anchor in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. Besides my job and my daughter, I have a passion that keeps me sane: woodworking. In my small workshop, I find peace between planks of wood and saws. It's where I process everything I see at work, turning the daily tension into something tangible and beautiful. Over the years, I've learned that life is fragile. I've seen the worst of humanity, but I've also witnessed its incredible resilience. Each day at work is a lesson in humility, a reminder that we are all mortal, all vulnerable. But I never imagined that I myself would become living proof of that fragility. My story begins on a summer afternoon in 2018. I was in my workshop, working on a table for Maya's new home. I wanted to create something special for her, something made with my own hands. Little did I know that day would change my life forever, not just as a father or paramedic, but as a human being. What happened that afternoon took me on a journey I could never have imagined. A journey that challenged everything I thought I knew about life, death, and existence itself. It's a story I still struggle to tell. Not because it's painful, but because words seem inadequate to describe the magnitude of what I experienced. But I will try. I'll share my story, not just as a testimony of what I went through, but as a reflection on what it means to be alive, what it means to die, and what might exist beyond the limits of our mortal understanding. This is my story, the story of how I died, of how I lived, and how, in the process, I discovered a universe of consciousness that defies everything we think we know about reality. It was a summer afternoon like any other. The air was heavy with Denver's heat, and I could feel the sweat running down my back as I worked on the table for Maya. The smell of sawdust filled the air, mingling with the metallic scent of tools. I was focused, determined to finish the project before the weekend. I remember looking at the clock. It was 2:37 p.m. Funny how certain details stick in your memory, right? I had just grabbed an electric tool, one I had used hundreds of times before. There was nothing special about that moment, nothing to alert me to what was about to happen. It was a mistake, a simple human error. Maybe I was tired, maybe a bit distracted thinking about Maya and how she'd react when she saw the finished table. Whatever the reason, the fact is that in an instant, my life changed completely. The electric shock hit me with a force I never imagined possible. 12,000 volts surging through my body. To put it in perspective, that's about 100 times more than the electricity we use in our homes. It felt like every cell in my body was being torn apart and rewritten at the same time. The pain. How can I describe that pain? There are no adequate words in our vocabulary. It was as if my entire body was burning from the inside, every nerve screaming in agony. My muscles contracted violently, and I couldn't let go of the tool. I was trapped, connected to a source of unimaginable pain. The world around me began to disappear. Colors blurred, sounds distorted. I could hear my own scream, but it seemed to come from far away, as if it wasn't me who was screaming. The smell of ozone filled my nostrils, mixed with something I recognized as the smell of burning flesh. My own flesh. And then, Everything went dark. It wasn't normal darkness, like when we close our eyes. It was a total absence of light, sound, and sensation. For a brief moment, I thought I heard my heart beating frantically, but soon even that disappeared. I was falling, or maybe floating. It's hard to describe the feeling when there's no body left to feel. The physical world, my workshop, my life, all of it had vanished in the blink of an eye. There was no more pain, no more fear. There was only nothing. In that moment, I knew with a certainty I had never experienced before. I was dying, or maybe I was already dead. And surprisingly, that realization didn't scare me. On the contrary, I felt a deep peace envelop me. I, Ezekiel Thorne, paramedic, father, woodworker, had ceased to exist as I knew myself, and I was about to embark on the most extraordinary journey of my existence. It's hard to describe what happened next. How can I explain something that transcends our normal understanding of time and space? But I'll try because I believe it's important to share this experience. After the initial darkness, I began to perceive something, not with my physical eyes, since I no longer had a body, but with a kind of expanded consciousness. It was as if the entire universe was opening up before me, revealing secrets I never knew existed. Around me, or perhaps within me, the concepts of inside and outside seemed to no longer have meaning. I saw patterns of light dancing. They were like fractals, complex geometric structures that repeated infinitely. Each pattern contained entire galaxies, and within each galaxy, there were more patterns, more fractals. It was a cosmic dance of indescribable beauty. The colors. Oh, the colors. They were like nothing I had ever seen before. They were alive, pulsating, as if each shade had its own consciousness. Blues deeper than the ocean, reds that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns, greens that whispered the secrets of life itself, and there were colors that have no name in our earthly language, colors that seemed to sing and dance. There was no longer any separation between me and the universe. I was the universe, and the universe was me. I could feel the energy of every star, the movement of every planet, the dance of every atom. It was as if the entire history of the cosmos was happening simultaneously, and I was a part of all of it. In this state of expanded consciousness, I began to understand things that had once seemed incomprehensible. I saw how everything is connected, how every action, every thought, every moment of existence is part of a larger pattern. I understood that death, as we know it, is just a transition, a change of state. Time no longer existed as we know it. Past, present, and future were one. I could see my entire life unfolding before me, not as a linear sequence of events, but as an integrated whole. Every moment of joy, every sorrow, every decision I made, it all was part of a larger, beautiful, and perfect pattern in its complexity. And then, I felt a presence. It wasn't something I could see or hear in the traditional sense, but something that permeated my entire being. It was a feeling of unconditional love, of total acceptance. It was as if the universe itself was embracing me, welcoming me. In that moment, I understood that I was connected to a source of consciousness, something greater and more vast than anything I could imagine. This source was not a being or a separate entity, but the very essence of existence. It was the fabric from which all reality is made. The peace I felt is indescribable. There was no more fear, no doubt, no regret, only a sense of total belonging, of being exactly where I was meant to be. For the first time in my life, or perhaps beyond life, I experienced absolute contentment. In that state of being, or perhaps non-being, I wanted to stay forever. The idea of returning to the limitations of the physical body, to the narrowness of human perception, seemed almost painful. How could anyone want to leave this perfection? But then, something started to change. I felt a kind of pull, as if something was calling me back. And with that pull came the understanding that my journey wasn't over. There was more to be done, more to be lived on the earthly plane. With a mixture of reluctance and acceptance, I felt my consciousness begin to condense again. The vastness of the universe started to fade away, the fractal patterns began to dissipate, and so I began my journey back to life as we know it. The transition back to the physical world was brutal, to say the least. After experiencing the vastness of the universe, the absolute peace, and the connection to everything that exists, being forced back into the confinement of a human body was, well, it was a shock, both literally and figuratively. The first sensation was pain, a sharp, searing pain that seemed to course through every fiber of my being. It was as if every cell in my body was screaming in protest, remembering the trauma of the electrocution. My muscles were stiff, contracted, as if they had forgotten how to relax. Gradually, I began to become aware of the sounds around me. Distant, urgent voices mixed with the constant beeping of machines. I could make out scattered words, defibrillator, now, again. I understood that they were trying to bring me back, to pull me from that state of perfection to which I had transitioned. Part of me wanted to fight against it. I wanted to scream for them to let me go, to allow me to return to that infinite peace. But another part, the part still tied to this world, to Maya, to my life as Zeke, knew that I had to come back. With each shock from the defibrillator, I was pulled more and more into physical reality. It was like being torn from a wonderful dream and thrown into an ice-cold bath. My chest burned. My lungs struggled to remember how to breathe on their own. When I finally opened my eyes, the hospital light was blinding, painful. I blinked several times, trying to focus. The colors seemed pale, lifeless compared to what I had experienced. The air had a strong antiseptic smell, almost nauseating after the purity of what I had felt on the other side. I saw a familiar face leaning over me. It was Harper, my friend and doctor. Her eyes were wide, a mix of concern and relief evident on her face. She was speaking to me, but I couldn't understand the words. Everything seemed distant, as if I were hearing through a thick wall. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. I felt something in my mouth, a breathing tube. I started to panic, feeling claustrophobic and trapped. Harper must have noticed because she quickly began working to remove it. Gradually, my consciousness expanded, taking over my body again. I could feel the rough hospital sheets against my skin, the weight of my own body against the mattress. It was strange, uncomfortable. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. And then, I saw Maya. She rushed into the room, her eyes red and swollen from crying. When our eyes met, I saw a mixture of emotions cross her face. Fear, relief, love. I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But my body wasn't responding the way I wanted it to. It was at that moment that the reality of my situation began to sink in. I had died. I had gone beyond this world and returned. And now, I had to learn to live again. The feeling of disconnection was overwhelming. I felt as if I were observing everything through a veil, as if I no longer belonged to this world. The emotions of the people around me, Harper's relief, Maya's fear, seemed too intense, almost painful to witness. As I struggled to reorient myself in this familiar yet strange world, one thing became clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. I had changed fundamentally, and the challenge now would be to learn to live with that change. The days that followed my near-death experience were a confusing blur of sensations and emotions. I was kept in an induced coma for some time while my body recovered from the trauma of the electrocution. When I finally woke up fully, the world seemed different. Time no longer made sense to me. The days blurred together, the nights felt endless. Sometimes I would find myself staring out the hospital window, watching the sunrise and sunset as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. And in a way, it was. Every ray of light, every shadow seemed to contain an entire universe of beauty and meaning. My body was healing in a way the doctors couldn't explain. My hands, which should have been severely burned by the electrocution, were recovering at an incredible speed. Harper spent hours examining my tests, trying to understand what was happening. I could see the confusion in her eyes, mixed with a scientific curiosity she tried, unsuccessfully, to hide. But it wasn't the physical healing that disturbed me the most. It was the hypersensitivity I had developed. Every sensation seemed amplified 1,000 times. The smell of the hospital, which I had barely noticed after years of working as a paramedic, was now almost unbearable. The texture of the sheets against my skin felt like sandpaper. Even the sound of people breathing around me seemed deafening. And the emotions? I felt like a superpowered receiver, picking up every nuance of feeling from the people around me. I could sense Harper's concern, even when she tried to appear optimistic. Maya's anxiety was almost palpable, enveloping me like a dense cloud every time she entered the room. Everything felt so limited. The hospital room, the daily routines, even the conversations I had with people seemed shallow and insignificant compared to the vastness I had experienced. I found myself yearning for that sense of connection with the universe, that deep peace I had felt. Maya spent a lot of time with me, sitting by my bedside, holding my hand. I could see in her eyes that she knew something had changed. She looked at me as if trying to decipher a puzzle, as if the father she knew had been replaced by someone familiar yet fundamentally different. One day, she finally gathered the courage to ask, "Dad, what happened to you? What did you see?" I was silent for a long time, trying to find the right words. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand? How could I tell her that the life she values so much, that we all value, is just a small fraction of something much greater? "Maya," I began, my voice still hoarse. "I saw everything and nothing. I saw that we are so much more than we think we are, that there's more to existence than we can imagine." I could see the confusion in her eyes, mixed with a hint of fear. She squeezed my hand tighter. "You're different, Dad," she said softly. "I know, sweetheart," I replied, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. "I'm trying to understand it too, but I want you to know that, no matter what happens, I'm still your dad. I still love you more than anything in this world." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. In that moment, I felt a connection with her that went beyond the physical, beyond the emotional. It was as if I could see her soul, bright and pure, a spark of the same infinite universe I had experienced. Harper tried to explain what had happened in medical terms. She talked about the lack of oxygen to the brain, about how near-death experiences could be the result of complex chemical reactions. I listened to her patiently, understanding her need to rationalize what had happened. But I knew, deep down, that what I had experienced was more than just a brain under stress. It was real as the hospital around me, maybe even more so. As the days passed, I slowly readjusted to life in the physical world. But one thing was clear: I would never again be the same Ezekiel Thorne who had walked into that workshop that summer afternoon. A new journey had begun, a journey to understand my place in this world after having glimpsed what lies beyond it. As I recovered and returned to my routine, I realized that my perspective on death had completely changed. As a paramedic, I had always dealt with death up close. I had seen it in its most brutal forms, and also in its most serene manifestations. I had always faced it with a mixture of respect and fear, as we all do. But now I saw it in a completely different way. Death was no longer the terrifying end that everyone fears. In fact, I almost longed for it. Not because I wanted to die, far from it. I still had much to live for, much to do in this world. But because now I understood that death was simply a passage, a transition to that state of perfection I had experienced. This new perspective brought challenges I never imagined I would face. How could I continue my work as a paramedic, knowing what I knew? How could I fight to save lives when a part of me knew that death was not something to be feared? The first time I responded to an emergency again was intense, to say the least. It was a car accident, A head-on collision. When we arrived at the scene, I saw a man trapped in the wreckage, severely injured. Instinctively, I sprang into action, doing everything I could to stabilize him and get him out of the vehicle. But as I worked, I felt something I had never felt before. I could sense the man's life slipping away, not just in a medical sense, but in an almost tangible way. It was as if I could see his vital energy pulsing, fading with each passing second. And then, for a brief moment, our eyes met. What I saw in his eyes left me breathless. It wasn't fear, as I had expected to see. It was acceptance, peace. As if he knew he was about to transition and was okay with it. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming internal conflict. Part of me, the trained paramedic, was fiercely fighting to keep him alive. But another part, the part that had experienced what lay beyond, almost wanted to let him go, to allow him to experience that infinite peace I had known. In the end, we managed to stabilize him and take him to the hospital. He survived, and I was genuinely happy about it. But that experience left me shaken, questioning my role and my purpose. I talked to Harper about it, trying to express my conflicting feelings. She listened attentively, her eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and fascination. "Zeke," she said after I finished speaking, "what you experienced is extraordinary. But you need to be careful. You can't let this affect your professional judgment." I knew she was right, of course. But how could I explain that it wasn't a matter of judgment? It was a deep, visceral understanding that death wasn't the enemy we always thought it was. Maya also noticed my change in attitude toward death. One day, as we were talking about my work, she asked me directly, "Dad, aren't you afraid of dying anymore?" I was silent for a moment, thinking about how to respond. "It's not that I'm not afraid, Maya," I finally said. "It's that now I understand that death is just part of something bigger, something beautiful." I could see the confusion in her eyes, mixed with a hint of fear. For her, as for most people, the idea of not fearing death was almost as frightening as death itself. "But that doesn't mean I want to die," I quickly added, seeing her expression. "There's still so much I want to do here, with you, with the people I love. Life is precious, Maya. Maybe now I understand that more than ever." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I learned to navigate this new reality. I learned to balance my knowledge of what lies beyond with my responsibility here and now. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt lost, torn between two worlds. But gradually, I began to see this new perspective as a gift that allowed me to appreciate every moment of life with renewed intensity, knowing that every experience, every interaction, every breath was part of something much larger and more beautiful than we could ever imagine. Over time, things began to settle into a new normal, at least for the people around me. For me, each day brought new challenges and revelations. I returned to my work as a paramedic, determined to continue making a difference in the world, even though my perspective on life and death had changed drastically. My first day back on the job was surreal. I climbed into the ambulance, feeling the familiar weight of the uniform, the characteristic smell of disinfectant and rubber. Logan, my longtime partner, greeted me with a cautious smile, his eyes studying me as if he expected me to disappear at any moment. "Welcome back, Zeke," he said, giving my shoulder a pat. "We missed you around here." I tried to smile back, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. How could I explain to him that the Zeke he knew no longer existed, that the man standing there now was fundamentally different? Our first call of the day was to an elderly woman with breathing difficulties. When we arrived at her house, we found a familiar scene, a woman in her 80s, sitting in an armchair, struggling to breathe, with her husband beside her, holding her hand tightly. As I tended to her, applying oxygen and checking her vital signs, I felt something I had never felt before. I could almost see the fragility of her life, like a thin thread connecting her to this world. but at the same time I could feel an inner strength, a resilience that went beyond the physical. When our eyes met, I saw in her a recognition, as if she could sense that I had been to the other side. We didn't exchange words, but in that moment, we shared a deep understanding. As the days passed, I realized that my heightened sensitivity wasn't just a burden but also a gift. I could feel the fear and anxiety of patients in a way I had never experienced before, allowing me to offer a different kind of comfort and care. But there were also difficult moments. Every time I tried to save someone, part of me wondered, am I preventing this person from experiencing what I did? Death was no longer the enemy to be fought at all costs, but a natural process, even beautiful in its own way. This new perspective affected not only my work, but all aspects of my life. My relationship with Maya deepened in ways I never imagined possible. I could feel her emotions in an almost tangible way, sharing her joys and sorrows with overwhelming intensity. One day, as we were walking together in the park, Maya suddenly stopped and turned to me. "Dad," she said, her eyes searching mine, "are you still yourself?" The question caught me by surprise, though I knew she had been observing the changes in me for months. "I'm still me, Maya," I responded after a moment of reflection. "I'm still your dad. I still love you more than anything in this world. But yes, I'm different. I've seen things that have changed my perspective on everything." She nodded slowly, processing my words. "Sometimes I'm scared," she admitted in a low voice. "Scared that one day you'll want to go back." There. I felt my heart tighten at her words. I pulled her into a tight hug, feeling the warmth of her body, the vibration of her life. "Maya, I'm here now. This is my place. With you. Living this life. What I saw, what I experienced, has made me appreciate every moment we have together even more." As I held her, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for life, for the chance to be there with my daughter, to continue my journey in this world. I realized that while part of me longed for the peace and connection I had experienced on the other side, there was still so much to be lived, so much to be loved here. The new normal wasn't easy. There were days when I felt out of place, as if I no longer belonged to this world. But there were also moments of transcendent beauty, moments when I could see the interconnectedness of all things, feel the pulse of life in everything around me. And so, day by day, I learned to navigate this new reality. I learned to use my experience not as a burden but as a guiding light, illuminating my path and the paths of those around me. The life I once knew had changed forever, but I was discovering that this change wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was an evolution, an expansion of my understanding of what it means to be alive. As the months passed, I found myself increasingly immersed in deep reflections about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the purpose of life. The experience I had beyond death was not something I could simply file away and move on from. It was a constant presence in my mind, coloring every thought, every interaction. Many nights, I would find myself awake late, sitting in my workshop, the woodworking tools untouched around me. In those quiet hours and when the world seemed to be asleep, I felt that vastness drawing near again. It was as if the veil between the worlds became thinner, allowing me to glimpse, even if briefly, that universal consciousness I had experienced. The connection to the source of consciousness that I had felt continued to haunt me, in the best possible sense of the word. Sometimes, in the middle of a mundane task, making breakfast, driving to work, attending to a patient, I would feel a sudden flash of that connection. It was as if, for a fleeting moment, I could see beyond the surface of things, perceiving the intricate web of energy and consciousness that connects everything and everyone. These experiences were both comforting and challenging. Comforting because they reminded me that there was something greater, something beyond this limited existence. Challenging because they made it even harder to focus on the mundane concerns that had once occupied so much of my time and energy. One day, during one of my regular checkups with Harper, I tried to explain these sensations. "It's like I'm in two places at once," I told her, struggling to find the right words. I am Ezekiel Thorne, paramedic and father, here in this physical world. But I am also something else, a point of perception, part of the universe, patiently waiting for the next step of the journey. Harper looked at me with a mixture of fascination and concern. Zeke, she said gently, you know there are medical explanations for this kind of experience, right? The lack of oxygen to the brain during your cardiac arrest could have caused... I interrupted her softly. I know, Harper. Believe me, I've read all the scientific articles I could find about near-death experiences. But what I felt, what I continue to feel, it's more than that. It's real. As real as you and I sitting here right now. She nodded slowly, her eyes searching mine. I believe you believe it, Zeke. And if it brings peace and meaning to your life, then maybe that's what matters, isn't it? Her words touched me deeply. I realized that I didn't need everyone to understand or believe in my experience. What mattered was how it had transformed me, how it had expanded my understanding of life and existence. This expanded understanding brought with it new challenges and questions. I began to wonder about the purpose of our existence on this physical plane. If there was a universal consciousness, a source from which we all were part, why did we experience separation and individuality in this life? I spent many nights contemplating these questions, sometimes discussing them with Maya, who, though she didn't always fully understand, was always willing to listen and offer her unique perspective. Maybe, she suggested one night, as we sat in the backyard watching the stars, we're here to learn, to experience things we can't as part of that universal consciousness you described. Her words resonated within me in a way I hadn't expected. Maybe she was right. Perhaps our journey in this life was an opportunity for growth, for evolution, a chance to experience joy, pain, love, loss, all the complexities of human existence, in a way that wouldn't be possible in a state of pure consciousness. This perspective brought new meaning to my life and my work. Every interaction, every challenge, every moment of joy or sadness became an opportunity for learning and growth. I began to see my role as a paramedic not just as someone who saves lives, but as someone who accompanies others on their journeys, offering comfort and understanding in moments of crisis. And so, as I navigated these deep reflections, I found a new balance, a balance between the Ezekiel Thorne who lived in this physical world, with all his responsibilities and relationships, and the conscious being who had glimpsed the vastness of the universe. It wasn't always easy, but it was a journey I felt privileged to embark on. Each day brought new discoveries, new understandings, and although part of me still longed for the peace and total connection I had experienced beyond life, I learned to find echoes of that experience here and now, in a patient's grateful smile, in Maya's embrace, in the sunrise after a long night shift. Life, with all its complexity and challenges, became a fascinating adventure, an opportunity to explore, learn, and grow, and I was determined to make the most of it, carrying with me the wisdom and peace I had found on the other side. One of the most profound changes I experienced after my near-death experience was in how I related to the people around me. The hypersensitivity I developed wasn't limited to physical sensations. It extended to the emotional and interpersonal realm as well. At first, this new sensitivity was almost unbearable. I could feel the emotions of the people around me as if they were my own. A patient's sadness hit me like a wave. A colleague's anxiety made my heart race. Maya's joy lit up my entire being. It was overwhelming and often exhausting. I remember one particularly difficult day at work. We had responded to a serious accident, and although we had managed to save most of the victims, we lost a young man. The family's grief was palpable, and I felt it with an intensity I had never experienced before. When I returned home that night, I was emotionally drained. Maya found me sitting on the couch, staring into nothing. She sat beside me, took my hand, and simply stayed there in silence. We didn't exchange words, but I could feel her love and concern wrapping around me like a warm blanket. It was in that moment that I realized that this new sensitivity, while challenging, could also be a gift. Over time, I learned to navigate this new world of amplified emotions. I began to see it not as a burden, but as a tool that allowed me to connect more deeply with the people around me. At work, this ability became invaluable. I could sense a patient's fear before they even expressed it verbally, allowing me to offer comfort in a more effective way. I could feel a colleague's exhaustion and offer support before they reached the point of burnout. My relationship with Maya deepened in ways I never imagined possible. I had always loved her deeply, of course, but now I could feel that love in an almost tangible way. I could perceive the nuances of her emotions, understand her unspoken needs. There were moments when this connection was almost painful in its intensity. One day, while helping Maya with her biology homework, I had an epiphany. We were studying symbiosis, the mutually beneficial relationship between different organisms. Suddenly, I saw our father-daughter relationship in a new light. We were like two separate organisms, yet deeply interconnected, feeding and strengthening each other. "Maya," I said, interrupting our study session, "you know I love you, right?" She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and amusement. "Of course I know, Dad. You tell me all the time." "Yes, but it's more than that. Since the accident, I feel our love in a different way. It's like I can see the invisible threads that connect us. It's beautiful." Maya was silent for a moment, her eyes locked on mine. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry. They weren't tears of sadness, I realized, but of a deep and complex emotion that couldn't easily be named. "I feel that too, Dad," she said between sobs. "Maybe not in the same way as you, but it's like I can feel when you're sad or happy, even when you're not home. It's strange, but good." In that moment, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed me. Gratitude for life, for the chance to be there with my daughter, to experience this deep and transformative love. My other relationships were also affected. With Harper, for example, I developed a deeper friendship. Although she still struggled to fully understand my experience from a medical perspective, there was mutual respect and a connection that went beyond words. However, not all the changes in my relationships were positive. Some people in my life found it difficult to deal with the new Zeke. My ex-wife, Maya's mother, for instance, became visibly uncomfortable with my new perspective on life and death. Our conversations, which had once been cordial, became tense and strained. "You're scaring Maya with all this talk about life after death," she accused me during a particularly heated argument. I could feel her concern, her fear that I might somehow be harming our daughter. "I'm not trying to scare anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm just sharing what I experienced, what I know to be true." She shook her head, frustrated. "You've changed, Zeke. Sometimes it's like I don't even know you anymore." Her words stung, but I understood. To someone who hadn't experienced what I had, my changes could seem drastic, even frightening. I learned to be more careful when sharing my experiences and insights, to tailor my new sensitivity depending on who I was interacting with. It wasn't about hiding who I had become, but about respecting that not everyone was ready or willing to accept this new reality. In the end, I realized that my relationships, like myself, were going through a process of transformation. Some grew stronger, becoming deeper and more meaningful. Others grew distant or evolved into something different, and that was okay. It was part of the journey, part of the growth and evolution that we're all, consciously or not, experiencing. As I embraced this new way of relating to the world and the people around me, I felt more connected, more alive than ever. Every interaction, every relationship became an opportunity for learning, growth, and experiencing the love and connection that are the essence of our existence. As the years passed, I began to reflect on the legacy that my near-death experience had left on my life. It wasn't just a distant memory, an extraordinary event that had happened and then been left behind. It was a constant presence, a lens through which I viewed and experienced the world. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond intellectual understanding, that one day I would return to that place, to that source of universal consciousness. This certainty, far from being frightening, brought a deep sense of peace and purpose to my everyday life. When I saw death approaching someone, whether it was an elderly patient in their final days or an accident victim fighting for their life, I no longer saw it as something purely tragic. Of course, there was still sadness, especially for the pain of those left behind. But there was also a deeper understanding, a recognition that death wasn't the end, but a transition, a release. This perspective fundamentally transformed my work as a paramedic. Whereas before I saw my role primarily as a lifesaver at all costs, now I understood that sometimes allowing a peaceful transition was just as important as fighting to keep someone alive. I remember one particular night when we were called to care for an elderly woman in a terminal state. When we arrived, we found her at home, surrounded by her family. Her body was failing, but her eyes were filled with a peace I recognized immediately. As I cared for her, offering comfort and pain relief, I felt connected to something greater. I wasn't just treating a patient, I was accompanying a being on her final journey in this plane of existence. In a moment of calm, she held my hand and looked directly into my eyes. No words were needed. I could feel that she knew, just as I did, that what was to come was not something to fear. "It's okay," I whispered, not just to her, but to her gathered family. "She's ready." Hours later, when she made her transition, it wasn't with fear or anguish, but with a serenity that touched everyone present. I saw tears in the family's eyes, of course, but I also saw understanding and acceptance. In that moment, I felt that I had shared a little of what I had learned from my experience, not through words, but through actions and presence. As the years passed, I realized that my near-death experience wasn't just something that had happened to me, but something I could use to help others. I began to speak more openly about it, not to convince anyone, but to offer a different perspective on life and death. I gave talks in hospitals, participated in support groups for people who had gone through similar experiences, and even wrote a book sharing my journey. Not everyone accepted or understood what I said, of course. But for those who were open, my words offered comfort and a new way of thinking about existence. Maya, now a young adult, became my greatest ally on this journey. She not only accepted my changes but embraced them, incorporating many of the lessons I had learned into her own life. "You know, Dad," she said to me one day, "your experience didn't just change you, it changed all of us around you. It made me see life in a different, deeper way." Her words touched me deeply, reminding me that our actions and experiences have an impact that goes far beyond ourselves. Now, as I look back on all these years since my near-death experience, I see a life transformed. Not a perfect life or one without challenges, but a life lived with deeper awareness, with a sense of purpose and connection I hadn't known before. I know that one day I will return to that source of universal consciousness. But until then, I embrace every moment of this earthly existence. Every breath, every heartbeat, every interaction is an opportunity to experience the beauty and mystery of life. Death, which I once feared and fought against, I now see as an integral part of the journey. It's not the end, but a new beginning. And when my time comes to make that transition again, I know I will go not with fear, but with gratitude for all I have experienced here. My near-death experience taught me that we are so much more than our physical bodies, so much more than our earthly identities. We are part of something vast and wondrous, something that goes beyond our current understanding. And so, I continue my journey, one foot in this physical world, the other connected to that vastness I experienced. Every day is an opportunity to bring a little of that light, that understanding, to this plane of existence. For those who are reading this, I want to leave a message. Do not fear death. It is just a transition, a passage to something beyond our current understanding. But also, don't forget to cherish this life. Every moment is precious. Every experience is an opportunity for growth and connection. Live fully, love deeply, and remember, we are all part of something greater, all connected in this incredible cosmic dance we call existence. And with that, I conclude my story. It's not an end, of course. It's just another chapter in this continuous journey we all share. Thank you for accompanying me on this narrative. May it bring a little light and understanding to your own journeys. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to turn on notifications to watch every new video and help us spread this message to more people. See you next time.